I'm Jeff Brown. That's Grant Brown. As you probably guessed, we're brothers. We're going to talk about qualified retirement plans and how they can help you in your practice. So, I'm glad to take, as I said, I'm glad to take any questions as we go along. So we help professionals design and administer qualified retirement plans. By training, I'm a tax attorney. I never practiced law, so my lawyer friends tell me I'm the best attorney there is, and I've been corrected to just say I'm the smartest attorney there is. Grant and I both have a designation. It's an ERPA or ERPA. Sounds like a contagious disease, but it actually is a designation so that we can represent clients for the Department of Labor and IRS. So as a brief overview, we're going to talk about types of plan designs that are available to plan sponsors, who can sponsor a qualified retirement plan, how owners can benefit from certain flexible designs, and what non-discrimination or compliance rules apply for these plans. So, kind of the basic plan is something called a SEP, or a Simplified Employee Plan. And it's basically like an IRA on steroids, available for plan sponsors. There's very little, virtually no flexibility in terms of how funds are allocated. Everyone's going to get the same percentage of pay. The maximum allocation to an individual is 25% of their compensation. And if one person is going to get 25% of pay, everybody's going to get 25% of pay. As far as being eligible to participate in the plan, you can require that someone be at least 21. You can require that they have some service in any 3 of the last 5 years, which might mean just working Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve. So there's no concept of 1,000 hours like you might be familiar with regular retirement plans. And in the 3rd year, you can require that someone make at least $550. So this is not a particularly good vehicle if you have any part-time employees and you don't wish to include them. If you're on your own and you don't have any employees, it may be just a very fine vehicle. The deadline for establishing these plans is the deadline for filing your income tax return as a plan sponsor, including extensions. So if you forget to do a plan the 1st year, this is a possibility. The second, yes?
What's the limit you can put in?
So someone asked, what's the limit you can put into a SEP? It's 25% of pay not to exceed $51,000 this year. And we're going to talk about compensation limits later, but there's a maximum amount of compensation we can take into account. Then the next step up, we'll call it as a simple IRA. Always be careful with anything with the name simple in it, because it usually isn't. But it's actually simple as an acronym. It stands for Salary Incentive Match Plan for employees. And that, just like the SEP, must be the exclusive plan of the employer. So I can't maintain one of these plans and also maintain some other kind of plan. If I have an SEP or a simple, that's it. Again, I could require, for eligibility, that you made at least $5,500 in the prior year or prior 2 years. There's no age, no hours requirement. It's simply a salary requirement. And it's primarily a salary deferral vehicle. So for 2013, someone can defer or put in out of their pay up to $12,000, and the employer is going to make some kind of contribution. They're committed to that. And either they're going to give everybody 2% of pay, whether they make deferrals or not, or more typically, the employer will contribute 100% of the first 3% of pay that someone puts in out of their pocket. We call it 100% match on the first 3% of pay. And that is the only contribution that can go in. There are no discretionary contributions, just this match or the 2% that going to everybody. Then we get to the grown-up plans. And they basically fall into 2 categories. We have what we refer to as defined contribution plans and defined benefit plans. You're probably familiar with defined contribution plans. They are profit-sharing plans. They are 401k plans. Officially, they're referred to as individual account plans because we create an individual account for each participant. Maybe not physically an individual account where everyone has their own physical account that they control, but we create an individual account on paper, at least. And the participant is going to gain or experience gains and losses from the investments. So the better my investments do as a participant in a defined contribution plan, the more money I'm going to have. The most that can be added to my account is $51,000, not to exceed 100% of pay. And you know, we have instances, particularly if we have a physician with maybe a spouse on payroll, if the spouse is older in some instances, and the physician's older, we've seen where we've actually added 100% of pay to the account of a participant and had that be perfectly legal. The other kind of plan are referred to as defined benefit plans. These are the types of plans that unions sponsor, the states sponsor, at least they have. The investments are pooled. The benefits are based on some kind of promise. Now, when you retire, you're going to get 3% of pay for each year of participation you've had in the plan. These types of plans tend to benefit older employees, enable a plan sponsor, owner, to make up for lost time when he or she hasn't been able to fund a retirement plan in the early years because they're paying off loans, they're paying for education for their kids, and this is kind of the catch-up plan. Your benefit at retirement is defined. That's why they're called defined benefit plans. There's a limit what you can receive. You can't get more than 100% of pay, not to exceed $205,000. And if you decide not to take an annuity, so much a year, so much a month, you can get a lump sum, and that lump sum at age 62 can't exceed more than about $2.4 million. So that's usually the target we're looking to fund for with one of these defined benefit plans. When we're talking about these plans, usually when we're dealing with professionals, we're trying to design a cost-effective plan so the owner gets let's say a greater share of the contribution so that the plan itself is a very tax-efficient savings vehicle. When we do that, we have to be sure that we don't discriminate illegally. So usually we hear the discrimination, we think you're discriminating against someone. When we talk about discrimination in the retirement area, it's a question of illegally discriminating in favor of someone we call highly compensated. So we need to know who is a highly compensated individual. You're highly compensated if you own more than 5% of the company. You're also highly compensated if you're related to someone who owns more than 5% of the company. So if you have your son or daughter on payroll for a very modest amount, they are highly compensated by definition. If your spouse happens to help in the practice manager, does the accounting, whatever, that spouse is highly compensated. I always like telling an employee whose kid is making 10 grand a year that the kid's highly compensated and they can go home and tell them that. So you don't have to pay him as much, right? You're also highly compensated if you made more than $110,000 last year. Actually, that's for 2012. For 2013, the limit is $115,000. And we have the ability, as long as we're not dealing with an owner, to limit the definition of highly compensated to the highest 20% of payroll. And there's years when we're dealing with clients where we'll say, well, you know, this year we think we want to amend your plan to invoke the top 20% rule because the testing will work better if we put that non-owner dentist, let's say, either in the top paid group or not have him or her in the top paid group, depending upon what we're trying to accomplish and how the demographics play out. So with all these plans, as far as design and administration, it's the demographics that control how the plan's going to operate and how we want to, say, tweak that each and every year. So really the devil's in the details and how this plan is tested. So we have this definition of highly compensated comes into place for discrimination testing, not only in terms of how much money the employer can kick in, but it may also have some rules in terms of what an employee can put in under a 401k plan, or what he or she can receive as a match contribution from the employer, and also for how we might define compensation. Just another techie term. By the way, the exam is next Tuesday. It's pass-fail. I have a reputation as an easy grader, just so you can, you know.
I'll jump in here for a second, actually. I know we didn't hand out PowerPoint slides, but after the presentation, or a week down the road, if anyone wants a copy of the presentation, you can contact either Mark or ourselves. We'd be happy to email you the outline.
So there's this term that's thrown around called top-heavy. Top-heavy isn't good, top-heavy isn't bad, it's just a fact of life with some plans. And it simply means that people we call key employees, slightly different than highly compensated, but basically people who own more than 5% of the company, or officers making more than 165 grand. If those folks have more than 60% of the assets or 60% of the benefits, we have what's known as a top-heavy plan. Quite frankly, with a lot of dentist clients that we work with, if their plan isn't top-heavy, they're not going to be happy, because they want to see that they're getting the bulk of the benefit under this plan, so it's a cost-effective, tax-efficient arrangement. If we are a top-heavy plan, then we just need to be worried about something called top-heavy minimum contributions. For defined contribution plans like a profit sharing or 401k, the top-heavy minimum is the lesser of 3% or the highest amount added to the account of any key employee. For defined benefit plans, it's a minimum accrual of 2% a year for each year of participation. And if we have a combination of defined benefit, defined contribution plan, it's either 2% accrual under the defined benefit plan or 5% under the defined contribution plan. Threw out some techie terms there, and we don't really have a long time to develop some of those concepts. So I'll move on, and if there's any questions later, I will address them. And then, as far as annual limits are concerned, for 2013, comp limit, we can't use more than $255,000 of compensation. You might be making $500,000. We pretend you only make $255,000 when we go to do testing or allocating any contributions. Maximum benefit, maximum contribution, $51,000. Maximum benefit, $205,000. Maximum deferrals under 401k, what you can put in out of your pocket is $17,500. $12,000 for the SEP. The IRA is $5,500. Highly compensated, we have those other things there. By the way, on our website, compensation planning, we have our comp planning, www.compplanning.com. We have all these limitations on our website. Is this you?
I can comment on that.
What?
You can mention that. Okay.
So compensation, there's a limit, as I said, for what we can use for compensation. It's $255,000 for this year. It also impacts what we can take as a deduction. We can never take more than 25% of overall payroll as a deduction into any plan, unless it's a defined benefit plan. We'll see how that develops a little bit later. And if we have a short plan year, let's say that I have a corporation that ends in September, I want to change it to a calendar year, then we have to prorate this salary limit for a short year of 3 or 4 or 6 months, whatever. And then one last thing under 401k plans. If you happen to be in my club, which is the over 50 club, you can put in something over and above that $17,500. It's called a catch-up. I can put away an extra $5,500. And the catch-up actually is for whenever you push a limit. So it's not only being able to put away more than $17,500 into a 401k plan, but I could actually get an annual addition of $56,500 if I'm over 50, as long as I deferred at least $5,500. So we have a lot of 401k plans where the owner only makes Of that deferral, $5,500 can be considered a catch-up because that individual is going to get $51,000 plus the $5,500 overall of $56,000. And if you have a 401k plan, we don't have time to get into 401k testing, but if you put away too much according to the tests, someone may say, well, you got to take some money back. You go, oh, but you're over 50. We've got $5,500 that we can use as a catch-up. We're kind of a credit against what you might have to take back. And sometimes that catch-up will avoid a highly compensated from having to take back excess deferrals. Often you don't know you have a catch-up until you go to do testing. So we'll know when we do the testing, but sometimes not before. Unless someone's already putting away $23,000, then we know it's a catch-up. With 401k plans, which are salary deferral vehicles, kind of like a simple IRA on steroids, to avoid discrimination testing that I was alluding to, we can have one of two arrangements. One is called a non-elective safe harbor, where everybody who's eligible will receive a 3% of pay contribution. That contribution must be what we call fully vested. Participants entitled to 100% of that account. An alternative is to provide a match contribution. The match would be 100% of the first 3% of pay that's deferred, and 50% of the next two. So theoretically, in practice, participants could get 4% of pay if they'll defer at least 5. Also possible to have what's known as an enhanced match, where the employer will match 100% of the first 4. It's at least as rapid as the first example, so that's going to be just fine as far as discrimination testing is concerned. You can't impose any limits on these safe harbor type contributions. So unlike a profit sharing contribution where I might say you have to work 1,000 hours, you have to be here for the Christmas party to get an allocation, here if you're eligible, you're going to get that match, or you're going to get that 3% what we call non-elective contribution. But you do make top-heavy testing go away. You do make the discrimination testing on deferrals go away. At least top-heavy goes away if that's the only contribution you make.
Just to kind of address your question, Steve, before, as far as what you can put in potentially as an employer or plan sponsor. So depending on kind of how your business is set up, whether you're an S corp or a sole prop or partnership, the calculation is slightly different. So I'm going to quickly go over an example, kind of if you are self-employed, so either as a partnership or a sole prop, that 25% of compensation limit that Jeff referred to before is a little bit different than if you were a W-2 employee. So essentially what has to happen though, if you are self-employed, we have to take into account your self-employment tax, so there's an adjustment that gets made. The other interesting thing is that essentially if you're in a partnership, the partnership is considered a sponsor. So if you were considering having a SEP plan, you individually as a doctor can't just set up a plan for yourself if you have wanted a SEP, because everyone, including your other partner, has to receive the same, or assuming he doesn't want to contribute the same amount percent of pay that you as a doctor might be choosing, it's not going to work. So a qualified plan would work better in that case. And essentially what happens is, as employer contributions are made, that ends up reducing your Schedule C. So let's look at an example quickly here. Just kind of taking an example here. Dr. Smiley, who has no employees, and he wants to figure out how much he can put into a plan. So in this case, I'm going to assume a Schedule C income of $150,000. Essentially, this is in the 401k world. We're going to assume again he's over age 50. He's going to. This is the 2012 limits, but put in $22,500 as an employee contribution, and all he's able to do in this case is put in $28,233 as an additional employer contribution. And essentially, what's happening is his $150,000 of compensation gets reduced. This is the self-employment tax portion, and then it's kind of an iterative calculation. But what happens is his net compensation after we make all these adjustments, he's only able to contribute 25% of his net compensation, which happens to be the $28,233. So even though he's making $150,000, he's only able to put in the $28,300 as a employer contribution, which I don't know if any of you have come across someone saying as a self-employed you can only put in 20% of your payroll. That is essentially, that doesn't work across the board, but it's kind of a shortcut that works in certain situations. Situations that it does not work though is if you have an employee. So if all of a sudden Dr. Smiley hires an employee, and this is again assuming that the employer contributions would be the same percent for himself as the employee. So if he's going to receive 25% of his pay, he's going to be forced to give his employee 25% of their pay. So in this case, if he has an employee at $150,000, he's getting 25% of his pay. So 25% of his employee's W-2 pay has to come off his compensation. Again, we have an adjustment for self-employment tax. So now his net compensation, even though he may think he's making $150,000, when we do our calculations, he's only making $93,000, and so 25% of that is now $23,000. So one of the things that gets very, I wouldn't say tricky, but a lot of clients that that end up coming to us have a plan that is set up this way, where it's not quite so flexible. They're having, in order to, and in this case, he can't even get the maximum contribution. But in order to, get a big benefit, he's having to give a pretty large, sizable contribution to his employee. Which, some people are very generous and want to, benefit their employees, but that may not be the full intention. So we'll talk a little bit later about some other options to get around that legally. As an example here, as far as kind of comparing a 401k to a SEP. If you had a SEP where you weren't able to take advantage of that employee contribution, in order to make a $50,000 deductible contribution, you would need to have Schedule C income, basically your net profits before you took into account any type of employer or retirement contribution. You need to show $260,000 of Schedule C income in order to make a $50,000 deductible employer contribution. Whereas in a 401k plan, because the employee contributions, those $22,500, don't go against the 25% limit, you only have to make $174,000 as far as on your Schedule C, and you can actually make a contribution of $55,500, or actually in 2013 it's $56,500. So, but by kind of taking advantage of a 401k plan, we get a dentist come to us and said, "Oh, I'm making above 260 and I want to put in 50,000." We'd say, "You don't need a 401k. A SEP is, serves your purpose. It's not worth the extra cost of having any filings or anything like that." For someone who's making less comp, wants to do more, a 401k might be a good option for them. Again, I mentioned it before. As far as if you're in a partnership, you're kind of stuck doing in a SEP environment what the other partner wants to do. And I'll have Jeff jump back in here, talk about plan design.
I was doing, we want to talk about some creative design. I was doing this seminar back about 15, 18 years ago. I needed 8 lives. And I thought, Snow White, the 7 dwarfs. And we needed 3 highly compensated and 5 non-highly compensated employees. And I realized that there were 5 people in the dwarf family that had personality defects that would keep them from being highly compensated. Grumpy, dopey, sleepy. So what we've done here is to show a continuum of plan design, getting a little bit more sophisticated with each step. So the first, just notice Snow White is 57, Doc is 50, Happy's 45. Look at the relative compensations, and then look at Sleepy's 55, making 50 grand, and then it goes down from there. So we have an array of ages and salaries. The first column is headlined pro rata. That looks like a SEP. Everyone gets the same percentage of pay, and you'll see that the principals get 73% or 72.9% of the contribution, spending $65,000.
So yeah, all these amounts in bold here add up to, the first 4 sections add up to $65,000.
So the second one is, you asked about integration or credit for Social Security, Steve. So that's getting a little bit of credit for Social Security. We're able to boost the contribution to the higher pays of the principals to $50,000 out of $65,000. Happy gets a little bit less money only because he's making less what we call the taxable wage base, the point at which you're no longer paying Social Security tax. Then there are things called age-based plans, which are based on salary and age. We did these the first year they came out, and then we stopped because there was something better that we're going to see in a mini-second. But the allocation is based strictly on salary and age. The older you are, the bigger percentage of pay you can get, because your time horizon until retirement is shorter. Basically what we're doing is we're testing the plan on the basis of benefits. What am I going to have in retirement as a percentage of pay based on my contribution this year? So the older I am, the less benefit I'm going to have in retirement from this year's contribution compared to, well, you're a little younger than me. If you got the same contribution, your benefit's going to be more because you have more years for that money to compound. So there's really no flexibility with age-weighted plans. The older you are, the bigger your allocation. And you'll see that we now have 53,000 going to the principals, but Happy is really not at all happy now. His allocation has gone down by a third, and it's even less than Sleepy, who makes half his wage, but Sleepy is 10 years older. And we know that for about every 8.5 years difference in age, there's about a 2-for-1 leverage that's available. The next to last column, titled New Comparability. These are also known as cross-tested plans. What in effect we do is we create, and all our plans have been structured this way for the last 15 years. We create a class for each and every employee. The employer will decide what each class will receive as an allocation, given certain limitations from IRS, and then we'll test it for discrimination. Before we can even test this, we have to satisfy something called a gateway test. So whatever percentage of pay, whatever the lowest percentage of pay any of these non-highly compensated receive, the highly compensated can't get any more than 3 times that. So in this example, the non-highly compensated are getting 4.2-something% of pay, which means we can't give more than 12.85% of pay to any highly compensated employee. So we've got that 3-to-1 leverage, and now we're at 88% going for the higher paid group. There's another little test under the gateway test that says if you give everybody 5% of pay, then you can give whatever you can justify empirically the higher paid group. So in this case, we bumped everyone to 5%, kicked in another $1,200 to the non-highly compensated group, and that enabled us to put away an extra $75,000 to the higher paid group. Now, I said we've created a class for each and every participant. So if I want to give more money to my office manager than I do everybody else, that's perfectly fine. If I have a non-owner dentist who's working with me, who's highly compensated, and for somehow we didn't talk about retirement plans when we made our agreement in terms of what he or she's going to get paid, I might decide that either I don't give them anything if the plan is not top-heavy. If I am a top-heavy plan, I may have to give them 3% of pay if they're highly compensated. So I've got a lot of flexibility with these plan designs. As one of my construction clients said to me, Jeff, I mean, I can give more money to the guys that don't bang up my trucks than the guys that do. And I said, precisely. You've got that level of control. And also, if we're trying to help the client and say, well, we're not really passing discrimination testing here, you either need to give everyone an extra 4% of pay, or we're going to give Dopey an extra 4% of pay, or tell us who else you want to benefit under this plan design. You know, then we have a dialogue. And then we can get that plan working very cost and tax efficiently for them. We don't have any more time to spend on that.
So, and quickly taking that concept of cross-testing, looking back again at Dr. Smiley here, in that first example I showed you, he had to give a 25% contribution to that employee. And in this case, you know, if we use that cross-testing, his maximum contribution is going to get bumped from $28,000 back to $33,000 to be the maximum, and what he has to give his employee who is making $100,000 is going to get reduced from 25% sorry, from 25,000 to 5,000. Now this assumes that the employee is, again, a large enough age difference from the doctor. So if he's 50 and he hired a 50-year-old employee, this design wouldn't work. But if there's a large enough age difference of enough of the employees, this works. So again, I just kind of ran through the self-employment calc there. We have a couple situations with current dental clients that Jeff kind of alluded to, but we have situations as far as someone wanting to potentially give an office manager, someone who's been with a company a long time, a larger contribution than what we tell is the minimum. But we also run into the case where maybe a hygienist has been with a company for a very, very long time, and they might be receiving a larger compensation just because they're getting 2 or 3% increase in salary every year, then the doctor may want to pay them. Maybe one hygienist is making 80 and the other one's making 40. So, without coming forward so much, we actually asked this one client, and said, we're doing our allocation. Do you want, Nancy or whoever to get the same dollar amount as far as the contribution that you're giving to the other employees? Or do you want them to receive the same percent of pay? So again, you kind of have that flexibility, assuming we're meeting our minimums, to give different employees different amounts. So you can kind of set your own standards for why you may want to give one amount or another. Kind of switching gears a little bit, for those, that $55,000 or $56,000 limit we were talking about before, for some clients, they say, is there any way I can get a bigger deduction and put more away for retirement? And the answer is yes. And the way to do that is setting up a defined benefit plan. One of the types of defined benefit plans that have come into favor recently, and I really think are much more easily understandable, take away some of the downsides of the traditional defined benefit plans. It's called a cash balance plan. So very quickly, basically what this is going to allow potentially a plan sponsor or a dentist to do is to make up for lost time. So maybe you haven't been able to save, through your 30s and 40s, putting kids through school, paying off a mortgage, and all of a sudden you're age 50 and you're like, I need to start building up some retirement savings. So this is a great way to do that. The limits, again, instead of that $55,000 or $56,000 limit of what you can put in, you're really, basically, the limit is what you're able to put in order to fund that $205,000 a year benefit. So we have some cases where you're able to put in $300,000, $400,000 a year tax deductible in order to basically build a big enough nest egg to pay out that $205,000 a year annuity at age 62. And again, the same way that we had the targeted contributions in that Snow White example, where in theory we give different classes or different employees different amounts. Also in these type of plans, we can kind of pick and choose and create classes for, maybe we're going to give, or I'll show you an example here. The older owner is going to have a $100,000 contribution, and the employees or staff or hygienists or however you want to split it up can receive some lower amount, like $1,000. The trick is, though, these plans are always paired with a 401k plan, and that's how they're not discriminatory. So the employees really receive their hunk of their benefit in the 401k plan, whereas the employer or dentist or owner tends to receive the biggest benefit in the cash balance plan. So quickly going over the limits here. For someone who's age 60 or 50, if you just had a 401k plan, the most you can put in, this is again 2012 limits, $55,500. For someone age 60 with a cash balance plan, they'd be able to potentially put in an additional $230,000 a year add to their benefit. For dental practices or professional practices, what you might be able to put into the profit sharing plan gets reduced slightly, or something called the PBGC. I won't go into long detail, Pension Benefit Guarantee Commission. But for a professional service organization with under 25 employees, the deduction limit gets a little bit complicated and reduced to 6% instead of 25%. But long story short, potentially you're putting in $285,000 just as an individual, and if you're in a 40% tax bracket, that's $114,000 of deferred tax savings. So it's pretty powerful as a planning tool. So again, a cash balance plan is essentially a mix of a defined benefit plan and a 401k plan. So kind of all the calculations behind the scenes, the limits, the actuarial work is all done as if it's a defined benefit plan, because it is. But But the nice thing about it is what the participant sees. So when you get a statement, it's going to look more like a 401k plan for the state for an employee. So it's a lot more easily understandable. In a normal defined benefit plan, you know, it's like Social Security kind of. Your benefit, as Jeff was talking about before, is based on your average compensation and the number of years you've been with the company. So you're going to get a statement that basically shows your retirement benefit might be, in this case, you know, $666 a month starting at age 62. Which for, I mean, and for some employees, you know, we're more the rank and file employees, it may only be like $137 or $37, which, you know, someone looks up their statements, $37 starting at age 62. What does that mean? You know, it's hard to use the planning tool or feel like that's a big benefit. And from an employer standpoint, so it's hard to value the participant. And also, as far as when they leave, as an employer, you have to pay them out a lump sum benefit. And the amount that you actually are having to pay them varies based on the interest rates that are set by the government. So even though we may be telling you in a traditional defined benefit plan, I forgot I made his name, Mr. Ben E. Fitz, but in a traditional defined benefit plan, even though 1 year we may expect that we need $10,000 to be the actuarial equivalent of this benefit, if the interest rates change, all of a sudden you may actually owe this participant $12,000, you know, just a year later. So the nice thing about a cash balance plan, though, is it's a lot more easily understandable. So the statement that the participant's going to receive is going to basically show and this will be more like a doctor, you know, he's going to have a beginning balance from last year's contribution of $100,000. The earnings that they're going to be credited is actually hard-coded in the plan document. So we usually use like a 5% interest rate or something tied to 30-year treasury. But essentially, you as the employer are still guaranteeing the benefit. So all the money is in one pool trust. If the trust account or investments earn 20% or lose 20% as an employee, that's still the amount you're getting. It's essentially incumbent on you as the plan sponsor or dentist to pay the employees that money. So I mean, this isn't kind of a shoot for the moon strategy. So I mean, we talk with the investment advisors and inform them that they really should be aiming for a 4% to 6% return. The more money that you're, well, actually I'll go into the details of how that works. But essentially, again, it's more easily understandable. But now your balance at the end of the year is $205,000. If an employee leaves, that's the amount they get. So it's, or in this case again, this would be the doctor having that big of a benefit. But it doesn't matter so much what happens to the interest rates. So it's a lot easier to plan for also when we're trying to figure out how much money needs to be in the plan. It's very definitive. And back in 06 there was less clarification, but in 08 or with PPA 06, it kind of clarified some of these rules and now lets us pay out what the actual benefit is. So here's the beauty of these plans. Essentially, I can kind of have it set up. This is the cash balance plan, and then these two columns essentially would be the 401k plan. So what we do is we kind of maximize the owner in this case. We figure out a flat dollar amount that all the employees have to receive, and basically we need to include enough employees that a big enough benefit. I had another sheet, I don't have it here, but there's nine staff with varying ages and compensations. But in this case, a flat $750 benefit, whether, you know, someone, I even had a 60-year-old in here, age 60, whether they're making $100,000 or $30,000, $750 was a large enough amount to meet that test. And what happens is, essentially they're going to get a profit-sharing contribution of around 7%. So you are having to make some, you know, sizable contributions to the employees. But if you already maybe have a plan where you're giving 5% as an employer contribution, to give an extra 2%, you're able to get a huge, you know, benefit for yourself. So the end, you know, result is, you know, putting in almost $480,000 and close to $430,000 is going to you as an owner. So the numbers, again, are pretty staggering as far as the overall percent of money that potentially can be going to you as a dentist, and also just the dollar amount, as far as if you haven't had the time to put them, or money or cash flow to put the money away previously, you know, that you can now make up for kind of some lost time. So how these work, essentially, at age 62, again, we're trying to aim for this $16,000 a month benefit. So that's $205,000 a year, kind of just broken down to a monthly standpoint. And you know, more or less, you have 2.5 million as a nest egg you're trying to fund for. So as time goes along, we kind of have a minimum amount that, you know, this is kind of our target line, but there's a minimum amount that by law you have to have at any point compared to where your assets are, where your benefits are, and also a maximum amount you're allowed to fund in the plan. So as we go along, we basically have the assets that are going to go kind of all over the place depending on what you may choose to put into the plan and also how the investments perform. So you may put in a large contribution, maybe you invest aggressively, the assets go down. So it's possible you may have a minimum required contribution. This is kind of simplified. Minimum required contribution to bring it up to a certain amount, or maybe you put in you had a great year, a lot of cash flow, you can actually put in more money than you're actually entitled to, and it just kind of builds up a cushion for future years. So again, it's kind of a compressed session, so I don't want to go into all the details. But there is a lot of flexibility. So in a 401k plan, usually we're going to come to you and tell you this is the amount, or you're going to tell us this is the amount, you know, I want to put in flat, $100,000 or $50,000. Where in a defined benefit plan, we're usually going to a client and saying you have a minimum required contribution of $50,000, you have a maximum contribution of $400,000. We're going to recommend you put in $200,000 to make your assets and liabilities equal, but in reality, pick a number between the minimum and the maximum, just realizing the less you put in now, the more you might be able to put in the future. The more you put in now, the less you might be able to put in the future. So just overall, again, with these defined benefit plans, you do have more employer liability because you are the one funding the benefit. Jeff said this isn't a downside, but ideally, you know, for some doctors, they really like to, you know, be in stocks and be in equities and trading. That's not really appropriate for this type of vehicle. So, you know, more conservative investments should be in the 401k plan. You do have an actuary that needs to be involved, so it's a little bit more costly to run. Most likely for if your dentist practice is under 25 employees, you won't have PBGC premiums, so don't worry about that one. But the benefits are really what drive this is the large contributions. You know, you're able to target benefit key employees, and in a cash balance plan, an older employee doesn't cost you more. Whereas in a traditional defined benefit plan, if you have an older employee, it sometimes can get very expensive to fund their benefit. Whereas in a cash balance plan, again, so that $750 amount, that's not always fixed. We put in some plans last year that was $500 was the amount, so even lower. We had other plans where we needed to have $2,000 going to the employee. So we really need to kind of collect the data and run the numbers before we can know how everything's going to shake out. And again, with the cash balance plans, the thing I really like about them is it's much more predictable. Liabilities, participants understand their statements a lot better, and it's easier to communicate the benefit that you're providing to your employees. So these type of plans really are ideally for owners who want to put in more than $50,000 a year. Those companies that have consistent profits. So if you're, you know, one year you're just getting by, and next year you have $200,000 or $300,000 in cash flow. You know, maybe not the best plan, but if you do have, you know, consistent income, this is a very good idea. Owners who are over age 45, if you're only in, you know, your early 40s, the limits may not make enough sense to warrant putting one of these plans. But if you're, you know, 45, 50, that's a good time to look at these. And especially if you already have a retirement plan that, you know, your company might be already putting in 3% or 4% or 5%. It doesn't cost that much more in employer contributions to get a much, you know, big benefit. Very lastly, just to wrap up.
So as far as deadlines are concerned, if you're putting a new plan, you need to have that signed, executed prior to the end of the plan year. Am I coming across all right? Hello? All right, here we go. If you have a safe harbor 401k, that needs to be implemented at least 90 days prior to the end of the plan year. If you already have a 401k and you're not a safe harbor, that needs to be executed at least 90 days before at least 30 days before the beginning of the plan year. If you're going to amend a plan, There are certain amendments we may need to make during the plan year. I can make amendments 2.5 months after the end of the plan year if I'm enhancing benefits. As long as I'm giving more, not paring down. You know, we have plans where we amend them, you know, within 2.5 months after the plan year, particularly with these cash balance plans. If we're having trouble, we might find that we need to bump the benefits or contribution credits to employees.
That's pretty much.
That's pretty much it. We thank you for your attention.
We actually have a one-page handout that just kind of is addressed to dental practices, kind of some general FAQs. It has our contact information. We run illustrations for free as far as if you did have a plan, you want to see if it's able to take advantage of this more flexible language. And again, or if you want to copy this presentation, we'd be happy to email it to you. And I think we have maybe one or 2 minutes for a few questions if anyone has questions on the retirement plans, this or anything in general.
No questions. Generally, if we look at a plan document, we can tell whether it has at least a possibility of being creative as far as design is concerned. Although I'll mention that just because they have potential for creative design doesn't mean that it's administered creatively. We have taken over a lot of plans that in theory were creative as far as how they were designed, but they weren't creatively administered. Our first promise to you, though, is that we're not going to read about the Dr. Jones case, all right? So we're not going to do anything that we can't back up empirically and be totally at ease if a plan should ever get audited by IRS or Department of Labor. Thank you for your attention. Handouts are in the back, and we're always available to help.